Hello, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Samar Hassan and I'm the founder of Epiphany. And we're back with Epiphany Talks number 11. I'm really sorry, in certain places we ended up writing Epiphany Talks number 10. Okay, we're losing track because of everything that we've been doing. And also I'm going to blame COVID, okay, because we've just been stuck at home for so long. But today it's fantastic. It's nighttime for us, but we've got people who are joining us from Jordan. So the youngest person, Jana, she's joining us from Jordan. So it's about 6 o'clock for her. And then we've got people also joining us during the daytime. So, 9 a.m., 10 a.m., 11 a.m., something of that sort, right? So without much ado, I think today's topic is extremely important because today we're going to be talking about the economic growth, which is due to the gaming industry. So I know that we've talked about it in a few of our previous sessions and we've highlighted what a big, dollar ticket size this industry presents. So today we're planning on doing a deep dive from the investment angle, from all of the different creative things you can do while being in the gaming industry, their own experiences. So we've got this really a very, very good bunch of experts. So I can't tell you how delighted I am. And without much ado, I'm going to start introducing all of them very briefly because they're going to do their own introductions. So first of all, we've got Paul Davalibi, who's the CEO at Obsidian Ventures, and he's also an investor. So when you look at him, see the dollar sign, guys. Hi, Paul. How are you?
I'm doing great, Samar. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us. Next, we've got PJ Putnam, who's the CEO of the PJ Hammer Corporation from the US. Again, another investor. Hello, PJ. How are you?
Hello. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Third, we've got Marcus Howard, who's the CEO of Project MQ. Marcus, hello.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. I saw a lot of excitement on your LinkedIn, a lot of people reacting and asking interesting questions already. Then we've got Jana. Jana is very interesting. Jana is just 14 years old, so she's 4 years older than my daughter Ishal. So Jana, thank you so much for joining us. Very excited to have you here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
And then last but not least, we've got Margaret, who's the CEO and co-founder of Playmatics from the US again. Hi, Margaret.
Hi, good to be here.
All right, so Margaret, let's start with you. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit more for our audience?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Margaret Wallace, and I have been working in games for about 20 years now. I started working in the realm of virtual pets, so a really fun, creative area of games. And since that time, I've been a founder and entrepreneur and have also worked with companies such as the BBC and Mattel. And I also work with startups and help advise new founders into how to wrangle the game industry and make it or break it, as they say.
Well, thank you so much, Margaret. We're going to ask you questions because a lot of our audience are actually young entrepreneurs. So I'm sure there are going to be lessons and questions being asked by these guys. Jana, could you introduce yourself next?
Sure. My name is Jana. I'm 14 years old from Jordan. I'm a Unity game developer and co-founder of Sakura Games, where we develop entertainment games to make education more interactive and enjoyable.
Thank you very much, Jana. What about you, Marcus? Tell us a little bit more.
Yes, I'm Marcus. I'm CEO of Project MQ. We are an experiential marketing agency that uses family-friendly indie games to help colleges and other non-endemic brands more effectively engage younger audiences.
Yep. Again, very, very interesting. We've hosted a session on edutainment. So obviously because of COVID-19 as well, this is an area which is growing very, very rapidly. And I think this is very interesting. It's an interesting time for you, I would imagine.
Certainly.
Okay. And yes, PJ, tell us more about you.
Yes, PJ Putnam. I'm the CEO of the PJ Hammer Corporation. We believe that making games through edutainment is the most important thing. However, all of our projects have a cause. For example, one of our recent projects is to benefit autism. And so we believe that it's not enough just to simply, for corporations these days to make money, but we believe that, corporations have a social responsibility also.
Well, thank you very much. That's heartening to hear. Because like you may know, Epiphany is an impact enterprise and we work a lot with impact entrepreneurs. In fact, particularly of interest, there is a startup based out of Karachi, which works on educational games for children with autism, for young people with autism. So, I'm happy to share more details whenever, if you're interested. And then Paul, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, my background is I spent the last 25 years in tech on both sides of the table. So I built companies early in my career quite successfully. And then later on managed an institutional venture fund in the Valley called Garage, pretty well-known fund out there. And for the last, 2-3 years, my focus has sort of gone away from tech broadly to gaming, which has been my lifelong passion. And so it was nice to combine. It's been nice to combine the two things that I love or know how to do, which is building companies and investing in companies and gaming. But the core of my thesis is that gaming fundamentally will create more wealth over the next 20 years than any other industry on the planet. So.
Absolutely. So we're going to, do a deep dive into that momentarily. But before that, I quickly wanted to ask Jana. So Jana, how did you end up in the gaming industry? And you're muted, so you'll have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yes. So my father always encouraged us to try new things so we can find something we like to do while we're still young. So that led us to try journalism, dubbing, voiceover, content making, and programming. And as journalists, we found out about an academy that teaches coding, and the journey started.
How old were you when you entered? How many years has it been?
4. Yeah, it was about 9 or 10. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. All right, so I told you guys my selfish interest anyway, okay? If I end up asking more questions from Jana, it's simply because of Isha. All right, so, but I do want to start off the conversation, and I'm going to take this question to everybody, I think. We know obviously that the gaming industry is huge, and estimated in certain places it says $264 billion strong. In other places it says $152 billion, but either way, okay, big, huge market opportunity, economic opportunity through the gaming industry. And of course, it's growing very, very rapidly yearly. So first question for Marcus, in your opinion, what do you think has caused the growth of the gaming industry? And what is the reason for such a high annual growth rate?
Great question. I think the reason it's growing so rapidly is that video games are the most immersive form of consumer media. Instead of just reading a book or watching a movie, you can actually be an active part of the experience. I also think that as the economy becomes more and more digital, kids grow up playing video games. I did the same. I got Super Mario Brothers 3 for Christmas when I was 6. And so I've been playing video games, nearly the last 30 years or so. And it just becomes a great way to socialize and to spend your recreational time, and in some cases, your recreational funds.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I'm so glad you pulled out Mario games. I think everybody relates to it. Thank God we're from the same generation. So, but what about you, PJ? Did you play Mario games as well?
Absolutely. Well, I came to the video game world a little bit later. I flew helicopters for the Air Force for a number of years. And then by entering into the video game, I realized that video games are fun. And that's one of the reasons why that this industry has grown so fast. But combine that with the idea of, the games are an escapism. It's an opportunity to be able to do something that you normally can't do in real life. And so it's the escapism combined with better technology that's really driven this growth. But as Jana said, it's also the acceptance. When I was growing up, Jana's age, my parents said, no, games are not good. Stay away from them. Well, I'm doing just the opposite. I've got a daughter who's 15 and a son who's 13, and I'm trying hard to get them to play competitive games. So I appreciate everything that you're doing, Jana.
Yeah, I totally agree, right? So I am unfortunately old enough to have experienced that as well, where our parents, in Pakistan at least, the focus has always been become a doctor or else become a scientist or an engineer. Then there was this whole trend towards, business. But of course, we didn't have so much opportunity that exists now for younger people with YouTube and everything is available. A lot of the content, a lot of the learning, all of these educational products are available for free. So that's, obviously it's a game changer. What about you, Paul? What would you say is the major reason for this high annual growth, and how do you think it all started?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things underpinning it in my mind. There's one is a demographic shift, a shift in attention. Like, you ask your average 11-year-old if they'd rather play soccer or play Fortnite, that 11-year-old's going to pick Fortnite, 9 out of 10 times. And so that shift in attention is inevitable, and that's driving a lot of the growth. And we're only going to see the effect of that 20 years from now. Like, when that 11-year-old has disposable income, this is when you're going to see the real inflection point. The second thing underpinning it to me is that gaming and the creation of virtual worlds fundamentally gets us closer to what people call the uncanny valley than any other medium. In other words, creating a world that your brain cannot differentiate from the real world. And that makes, in my mind, gaming the end game. It's the end result of everything humans do as leisure, as entertainment. Gaming essentially in 20 years consumes everything we do as human beings as recreation. If I can convince you that human beings will invent rooms where we can create virtual worlds that are indistinguishable from the real world, what does that mean for education, travel, the adult industry, like you name it, movies, TV, everything gets disrupted, everything gets consumed by gaming, everything now happens in virtual worlds. And so to me, it's the end game. It's the apex of human technological innovation in terms of how we entertain ourselves.
That's very interesting, by the way. So very quick anecdote. I don't know if you've seen that particular episode from Black Mirror, which is very interactive. Have you guys seen that? Where suddenly you've got the choices and you're choosing, what's going to happen next. And I remember as a child, I used to love these choose your own adventure sort of books where you could have options to do it. So I think, all of the books that we've read, all of the creativity that we used to experience in a different way, now you've got the possibility to create worlds of your own, desires. I think that's of course very, very interesting, because you're in control and you're the one driving the entire show, right? You're the mastermind. So I think that, of course, human beings also love a lot of control. What would you say, Jana? How has it grown in Jordan? What have you seen over the last 4 years?
Jordan?
And just generally in the Middle East, if you can reflect on that.
Well, Jordan is a very small country with only 10 million people. So the data is relatively, it's hard to confirm. So you don't have much data about how many studios we have in Jordan, but it's in the right direction to become a hub for Arab developers, especially if we focus on creating Arab content. It's the fourth most used common language in the world. So, and there are not many games in Arabic. So if we focus on making Arabic games in Jordan here, I'm sure we'll become a hub for Arab devs all around the world here.
Okay, and Margaret, what about you? What do you think? What are you seeing?
So I would say the most astounding thing I've discovered about how video games and gaming in general have entered into our daily lives is how pervasive it is. I mean, the whole idea of game design and design thinking is an increasingly important competency that touches many, many areas of our lives. And when I started in video games, I was working in entertainment, pure games as entertainment. And I've seen an explosion of games and experiential technology and experiences enter every single industry vertical you can think of: healthcare, training, education, science, discovery. And that's what I have found really exciting. And I also think that there's been a lot of evidence to show that if the skills that one picks up in games have real world applications. And even just recently in the United States, I'm sure a lot of the panelists have heard this, the Food and Drug Administration has approved the first game as a prescription for the treatment of ADHD. And And so we're seeing that benefits of gaming and learning how to be competent in games has potential health benefits and wellness benefits. And then finally, I'll just say I'm personally fascinated by the various applications that we're seeing in our lives around artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I think games are a really important entryway to teaching the general population a level of literacy around how that can be used, how artificial intelligence can be used.
And in your experience, because you worked in a whole range of industry sectors, so I'm going to ask you for some examples which really stand out for you, which you thought were amazing application of games in different industries.
So I, when I was in New York, I was heading up a social games and an impact accelerator for games that's been put on hold because of the coronavirus, but I had a chance to interview and meet with scores of companies. And there's a company in Brazil called Eludica, for example, and Sao Paulo, and they are using virtual reality and games to implement vision testing for kids. So, they'll use an HTC headset that uses eye tracking technology. And just by allowing kids to play these simple games, which track their eye movements, you can get a pretty accurate reading around how good that child's vision is. We're seeing I worked on a project that used games for helping citizen scientists all around the world, help scientists do research ranging from everything from marine animals to discovery in nature to processing of journal articles. It's just incredible just to see the range. I've worked recently on a project around using games for smoking cessation, and industrial training, first responder trainings using games. It's just, there isn't a single industry that I've encountered that doesn't in some way engage with games or design thinking, or technologies. And this is the last thing I'll say, games also, the games industry incubates so many cutting edge technologies that make their way out into other sectors as well.
And I think that is a very nice segue into our next question about, what is the role of technology and how we're seeing that. So I'm going to ask Marcus Blockchain Howard to tell us a little bit about, how you're seeing the application of technology.
Inside the blockchain space or generally in the gaming industry?
Well, generally in the gaming industry, but I think we can zoom in on the blockchain side for you specifically.
Sure. So blockchain is basically a fancy loyalty program with a database. The general difference between that and traditional internet is it's encrypted, distributed, and decentralized by default. And what we're seeing in the gaming space is it's finally giving gamers an opportunity to have real ownership of digital assets. So digital items, digital currencies, being able to be transferred from one game to the next or between one user and the next. If you've seen, games that may have been around from the N64 or the PlayStation or the GameCube, if they had online component, let's say you spent real money to acquire assets in those games, as soon as those games are shut down, those servers are shut down, you lose access to those assets, even though you paid real money for it. Hypothetically, and we're starting to see some early examples now, with the blockchain protocol, you can now permanently own those assets and then either trade them to other users, potentially transfer them to other games, or trade them on a secondary exchange.
There are a few game ideas that have come across recently in Pakistan as well, which were integrating waste recycling and basically incentivizing that by, so each time you win a level, you're collecting different points, and then, you're basically able to go and purchase some grocery items from it or so on and so forth. But it's linked to how many times are you cleaning up and how much waste you've actually transmitted back to the waste collector. So kind of like gamification of that. What would be the best application that you've seen, Marcus, in your experience?
For a social good?
For social good,
I've not seen it really applied to a social good yet, but mostly what I've seen is people trading skins from games like the equivalent of CSGO or Halo, or what I'm seeing a huge increase in is platforms as a service to empower game developers to implement blockchain without having to write the actual blockchain code themselves. and that makes the blockchain technology more accessible. And we're starting to see it particularly in esports betting. As an extension of sports betting, you want to make sure that the people who are betting are of age to do so and that they have the funds or the assets to wager. So blockchain is used as a tool for KYC, know your customer, and AML, anti-money laundering.
Okay, yeah, thanks for sharing that. For you, PJ, I wanted to ask about, from the investor's perspective, what is the economic impact of investing in this industry, both for the people that you're investing in, organizations that you're investing in, and you as an investor?
Absolutely. As we said earlier, that the industry is $152 billion worth and it's growing 10%. I actually think that 10% is a smaller number. And with the coronavirus right now, I just saw a recent article saying that internet traffic has gone up more than 70% in the last 3 months. So we're getting a lot more people involved in technology that maybe weren't involved in technology. We get a lot more people that want to be entertained. And when you start looking at other forms of entertainment, you look at the movie theaters, it's a little bit different or even scary to go and sit in a movie theater. Even if we want to, and the characters and the acting is fantastic, it's just the situation. So combine that with the technology, the rise that is coming in. You've got now the new platforms. You've got mobile computing. I mean, my phone's got more power in it now than I had even when I was in college. So it's creating, if you will, and this is a bit of a cliche, the perfect storm for investing. Right now, there are a lot of great companies, there are a lot of people like Jana that really understand games, that want to be in games. It's a great opportunity for investors to look around and pick and choose. And so for us personally, we look at, what is the medium, where does the game play, if you will, although I understand that a lot of games are starting to become platform agnostic, which I think is fantastic. But what is the platform? What is the message? And then I ask, when I'm looking at a game, what is your avatar of a buyer? As a player, who is the player? Is the player designed to be somebody that is college educated, that's really interested in space, and or is it somebody who's more of a casual player? And it runs the gamut. And then we look and see what is the niche market, what is the algorithm, if you will, as to how many people we believe would be playing that type of game to what the investment is. So it's a great opportunity right now to both be receiving funds as well as to be an investor.
What about you, Paul? Would you agree that this is something which is, I mean, look, with games, right? You never know. A game that you invested in could become, something amazing, but it's also possible that you lose all of your money by investing in a game. So, how do you navigate through that? And also maybe you don't have to tell us the figures unless you really wanted to, but just tell us, how many X were you able to get in kind of like the best gaming deal that you ever made in your life?
That's that's kind of an unfair question.
Okay.
For a few reasons, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
One, I don't invest in games.
Okay.
Because I think investing in games is like investing in art or theater shows, or what a game I think is good, someone else could think is terrible. Like it's too subjective. And so I stay away from games. The other piece of the investment puzzle that I stay away from is teams, like organizations, esports organizations, because to me, none of them have figured out how to monetize. They're all incredibly overvalued. And I just don't think from an investment perspective, it makes sense, or a business perspective, it makes sense. Now, here's the good news. The good news is the entire industry is massively undervalued in spite of all the hype and crazy valuations that are out there, right? My firm thesis is that we haven't hit that inflection point yet, and we're still a far ways away. As a consequence of that, the kind of investments I'm making and the kind of companies I'm building aren't like, hey, 3 months I'm in and out, or a year I'm in and out. right? I'm building and I'm investing in a lot of core infrastructure, a lot of products and services and tech for gamers. Everything that's not sexy. It's a lot of the picks and shovels. It's the nuts and bolts that sit underneath all the sexy things. And to me, that's where the opportunity is. The difficulty is investing in that space or building in that space is really hard. And there's not a lot of people doing it well.
Yeah.
So
and it's a long-term game as well.
Sorry?
And it's a very long-term game as well, right? I mean, you have
It's
to
a
invest
long-term
over
game.
time, and you have to wait and be patient.
You have to understand tech. You have to understand gaming and the subtleties. You have to understand building businesses. Like, the amount of expertise required to succeed there is very high. And I don't see a lot of smart money in the space today. I see rappers putting money in, esports teams, and I see, startup teams that are, gamers, and they are excited because they play games and therefore think they can build companies. But it's a lot of noise today. And so I'm excited about the investment opportunity. But my advice to people who have money to invest in the space is, don't just like spray it out on everything and hope that, things are going to work out because the whole industry is going to work out. It's really, don't go it alone. Go with someone who knows what they're doing, who can navigate the space. And if you don't have that person, put your money in an ETF or something that covers the gaming space generally and make a bet on the broader trend. But investing sort of at that level is tricky. It's tricky. And we're not going to see $10-20 billion exits tomorrow. They just don't happen. They haven't happened yet. We're still too early. They will happen, but we're still too early today.
So, Mark, if I can,
yes, absolutely.
I agree with Paul. And the analogy is the Great American Gold Rush that we had in 1849. There were people that made a little bit of money by finding gold, but hands down, the people that made the most money during the gold rush were the ones that were selling the picks and shovels. The Levi Strauss who came up with blue jeans. So, Paul, I just wholly endorse exactly what you just said.
Can I offer a counterpoint to that just quickly?
Sure, absolutely.
Just really briefly. So I'm not an investor, but in my capacity as heading up the accelerator, I did speak with a lot of investors who are specifically focused in the gaming space. And while I'm not challenging what was just said, I will say that for better or for worse, there are a lot of games investors out there right now who are specifically looking at game studios and investing in game studios. That investment thesis may or may not prove itself out, but I've noticed a sea change in terms of that focus. 5 years ago, you would see investors only focusing on platform plays. But now, again, for better or for worse, we are seeing more and more investors, specifically in Silicon Valley and the West Coast of the US, the ones that I know about, who are looking at studios and who are looking at quick in and out sort of investments.
The only way investing in games works, in my opinion, is if you can afford to invest in a huge portfolio. Same with esports teams. So if you're Andreessen Horowitz and you can make a bet on 25 games, 30 games, or 30 studios, and maybe that's a total of 50 games or 100 games, eventually you're going to have a Fortnite in there, right? And this typical venture investing, the one Fortnite makes up for everything else. But like, to me, betting on one or two studios or that I've seen, or investors who make a bet on one, this is a fool's errand. The chance of success there is very, very low.
I believe, and I still contend that the greatest challenge and opportunity in the gaming industry, the global gaming industry, is game discovery. My first gaming company, my twin brother and I started in 2013, was a multimedia search engine exclusively for indie games to solve game discovery. So to help indie studios build their target audience, lead generation, and help gamers find the next novel game. Nothing against AAA games, but maybe people don't want to play the next, Assassin's Creed 15. But I believe that same technology and that solution adds value to the investment community. If you can understand and consistently identify amazing games before their commercial launch, which is what we did on a consistent basis, I think you can build a portfolio of high-performing breakout hits before most other people know about it. A great example is we discovered Dead Cells from Motion Twin, a French developer, 2 years before their commercial launch. And in 2018, they were awarded the Best Action Game of the Year award. They beat out entries from publicly traded AAA game studios like Ubisoft, Activision, Blizzard, and Capcom.
So I'm just kind of like using this as an example to reflect on what I see in the impact space as well, right? So in Pakistan and the gaming space both. So in Pakistan, we do have a few investors now who are investing in different studios. So they're trying to support them, but especially from an emerging economy, I think you have to invest in both. So there is money which needs to be provided to the teams that are trying to make games, build games, because churning out hyper casual games and you're just doing them very quickly. But if you're really trying to build deeper games, much more thoughtful games, then of course it's very expensive. So money is required at that end, but it's also required in training and educating people and finding the right and kind of like honing the raw talent, right? So I think you have to pitch in at all the different levels, and this is something which probably Margaret will agree. I see this on the impact acceleration side. So on the impact side in Pakistan, there are very few. Now it's grown over the past 3.5 years. I've seen that it's grown, but it's still not as rigorous as it needs to be. So everybody is wanting to invest in technology and tech startups, but not so much really focused on, okay, is it for purpose? Is it not for purpose? So yes, Margaret, you want to add something?
Well, just really quickly, I will say, having spoken with a lot of specifically impact investors and game/tech investors, a lot of times, a lot of impact investors don't understand games. A lot of games investors may do impact investing sort of under the radar. They won't say they're impact investing, but they do try to focus on that on some level, if not through their fund, them personally. I'd say there's a real gap between conscious impact investing. People get scared off by games. I've spoken with scores of impact investors. They're afraid because there have been so many failed attempts to get into the space. It's expensive and hard to scale games and to make the economics work in general, as everyone here knows. So yeah, it's a real challenge. I mean, there really has to be a paradigm shift on some level around, that focus, I feel.
So Jana, I'm going to take the question to you and ask you if you know already about different investors who are interested in your country in investing in games. Are there people like that who are understanding the opportunity? They may be few in number, but are there at least some people who are interested in this space?
Well, we have few investors, but as I told you, data in Jordan is very limited. So even the investors I know are all talk. They don't really invest in people. So as you said, as Marcus said, the game discover is very hard. It's a hit or miss. You can't be in between.
Okay. So
an interesting parallel is Broadway shows. I always go back to that because in spite of the terrible economics of a Broadway show, in spite of the high failure rate of Broadway shows, hundreds still get funded every single year. They still get funded, and there are still investors who are excited to put money in Broadway shows. It's not institutional VCs for the most part, just like in gaming, it will most likely never be institutional VCs other than the very biggest who can, buy large portfolios. But there will always be people who are passionate about gaming projects, who have money to burn or money to, take a flyer on something exciting that if they lose it, they won't miss it. And so games will get funded. Like it's not like it's, oh my God, if Sequoia doesn't invest in games, the industry is doomed. No, there will always be people excited to invest in games. I just think it's the profile of investor that we need to be specific about in terms of who's going to make those investments.
We're also seeing a technological shift here, really quickly, to crowdfunding. I mean, Kickstarter has been wildly successful for indie studios around the world. Republic recently acquired Fig. Fig was kind of like Kickstarter exclusively for video games. And so that's now, bolted on into their platform and their ecosystem. And it allows developers to, build their game and maintain their creative control, which is really, a priority for independent game developers.
And just to add to that point, Marcus, obviously it also gives a great opportunity to people who've developed games to market it, right? And right from day one, from get to go, there are people who are involved, who are playing, and they're, giving them feedback. So it's great in terms of developing the right product at the end of the day, but also just able to generate that excitement and get money also, right, to fund that. So we've got, by the way, so considering we were talking about impact, it's interesting that we've got a question from Facebook. They're saying, what is the role of gaming in education, especially when everything is going online? So whoever wants to answer, just volunteer. Yes, Margaret.
Just really quickly, it's funny because ed tech, educational games have always been a tough market, in my opinion, although I've seen a resurgence in interest around ed tech games in the past couple years. And then certainly with the whole pandemic and COVID situation, they've gone even higher in terms of interest. And investments, I've seen companies get some investments recently. I'd say there are two types of educational games, ones which focus on curricula that are additive, and then ones which are more deeply incorporated and part of the core curriculum. And that informs your scaling strategy around educational games and tech. I will say there's a quality issue. Oftentimes the quality suffers. I've seen a lot of ed tech games get funded in the United States through grants that never really make it past getting the grant money for a whole variety of reasons around know-how and scaling and technology. And so it's a real tough market, I think, to really excel in. But I'm seeing some superstars come up in the space recently, surprisingly for me at least.
Okay, so, and then they asked another question regarding engagement. How does gaming approach engagement in students?
So my brother and I last summer partnered with Junior Achievement. It's one of the oldest nonprofits in the country. They had a STEAM program that they were building their own summer camp. We augmented that with a game development course where we used video games to teach the kids how to make their own video games, which not only taught them how to code, because as we all know, video games are just apps, but also taught them how to be small business owners. And so that may be anecdotal because it was just one course, but out of 30 students, I believe we had successful and positive reviews from about 25 or 26. And Junior Achievement's interested in continuing to grow and expand that program. So I think there's a lot of value in leveraging the concept of video games, which kids have interest in, to introduce their traditional educational curriculum. I think especially as we look at how does education, especially higher ed, evolve in the future, I would love to see colleges use the concept and the industry of gaming and esports as the context for their business program, for their legal program. And, for the software development program, it's have all the students build their own game, build a business plan around an esports event, build a contract for a high profile esports player, because then it will be more relevant to the student. And hopefully it will increase their interest and engagement in the core concepts.
And I think,
yes, I think that the fact that the games put you in their world, and when you're in class, you just have to listen to the teacher and do nothing else. This is so not encouraging. It's very bad and it gets boring. So being able to interact with the world, especially in VR. If education was in VR, it would be such a great experience. We're working on that right now. So I think the fact that they put you through inside that world is what makes it engaging.
So Jana, I think there are some questions coming. I'm glad that you've spoken up. So one question is, from dubbing, voiceover, content making to game development, and now, you're an entrepreneur. So, you've got such a diverse experience at such a young age. So how did this happen? How did this come about? That's a question that's come in. And then I wanted to ask you, in addition to that, what aspects do you enjoy the most? So you've kind of, developed this whole kind of range of skills. So which aspect do you enjoy the most, and how did this even happen?
As I told you, my father always encouraged us to keep trying things. And in the end, when we started game development, we gathered all the skills we have and put them in games. So we do the voiceover for games. But if I had to say the favorite part of it, it's very hard because most of them are fun. Voiceover and dubbing is really amazing. Seeing your voice it's kind of hard because you have to go with the lip syncing. It's kind of hard. So, but the game development industry, I'd say it's my favorite because you enjoy the creation of games. When you see the things interact after writing a piece of code or designing a model, that's the best part of it.
Yeah. And I think also, so as I've spent a lot of my career as a communication specialist, as a marketeer. When you see the results in action, sometimes it's very gratifying, right? You see it, whatever you've been working towards. So I'm going to, move on and kind of ask, what is the future? What do you guys think is the future? I know we've talked about it. It is growing. It's growing very rapidly. COVID is accelerating it. But what do you guys think, in 5 years' time, what are we going to see?
Well, I think education is going to be online forever, since we were forced to try it. Now we actually know that it works. Before, we wouldn't have ever tried it if the pandemic wasn't here. So the fact that it worked is encouraging us to make new applications for education online, and maybe we'll be able to make it gamified and add edutainment games to the system. That would be really great.
What about you, Paul, PJ, Marcus? How are we seeing the future?
I don't know how many people listening are Star Trek fans, but again, the analogy I always use is there's no other show on the planet that has more accurately predicted technological advances. And you could argue it's because the engineers were inspired by it, but it's Star Trek holodecks. It's rooms we go into and can create any virtual world. And we can argue is that 20 years or 30 years or 15 years, technology will figure it out. And so what will end up happening is a convergence of all forms of human entertainment, that gaming becomes the dominant form of human recreation, leisure time, and how we entertain ourselves. So all the traditional media and forms of entertainment that we enjoy today, to me, converge into one thing.
PJ, would you agree?
Well, I do, and I look forward to the holodeck. I really do. I think it's a fantastic idea. Unfortunately, I think it's a bit further out than definitely what I'd like. In the next 4 or 5 years, I agree with what Marcus said earlier. Blockchain, the interoperability between assets, the ability to play based on your favorite platform versus the platform that the software is only written for. So I think that we're going to see a lot more convergence and a lot more agnostic, if you will, programs that will play on everything. And I look forward to that. I look forward to the idea that you brought up earlier is gaming and entertainment. I had a client who was working, but she did a lot of work with gaming with special education, training. And that, right now we're seeing a lot more games on, more of, the fringe area where they're willing to try new techniques. I saw gaming for PTSD, recently, coming in. So I see that, some of the medical benefits, as Margaret said, are going to rise. I like that. I like the idea that it's getting more in education. Technology is a symbiotic relationship with gaming. The more games get popular, the more investments in games, the more that we push the level of technology up to, as Paul said, the holodeck. So 4 or 5 years, I see blockchain, I see interoperability, I see a lot more into the non-traditional type areas such as education. I see, we're even using it. I'm a scoutmaster for my son and daughter's troops, and we're using training in games now. This is brand new. We're learning about first aid for gaming. You do that and then you go out. I know that my friends that are still in the military, they did a case study that said if you fly the flight simulators on your computer for a number of hours, your head's you're just so far advanced rather than somebody who just walks up to the jet and starts flying. So, we're seeing now games as training sources, but it's still a fringe element and they're still in the testing phase. I'm going to see in the next 4 or 5 years that it's going to be the curriculum, that we're going to do gamification first, and then we're going to do hands-on instead of the other way around.
Yeah. I used to be really bad at games, by the way. So I used to play this Street Fighter. I just learned, somebody taught me a trick where M. Bison, I think that was his name, he does the slide, and that's the only thing that I knew. So I would always pick that character. So I was really bad at games, and I wish I was better. But let me just ask you guys very quickly, what is your favorite game or favorite games in plural? Margaret, do you have one?
My favorite. Oh, sorry, you said Margaret. Go ahead. Go ahead. No, please go ahead.
Oh, no. Okay. So I'm really loving my Oculus Quest, and I just love the wireless, untethered experience of being in virtual reality. So I've been checking out a lot of games there. I love games like Brawlhalla, Dreams, which is more of a game maker, I think is a brilliant piece by Media Molecule, and Sky Children of Light. I've really been enjoying that by that game company.
Yes, Marcus, you can go next.
Thank you. Margaret, I'm glad to hear so many of those are indie games. I also have Dreams on my PS4. I look forward to, as my daughter gets a little bit older, making games with her. The one I'm playing right now is called Don't Starve. It's by another indie team. It's kind of like a 2D side-scrolling version of Minecraft. So I get to play that with my brother and sister. We all live in 3 different states. So I really appreciate, spending time with them via video games.
What about you, Paul?
I've been a shooter guy my whole life. Like if you're asking me of all time, probably the Star Control series, but like recently I play a lot of CSGO and Apex, and I went back to WoW Classic for a bit. Oh, no indie games, unfortunately, on my list.
What about you, Jana?
Well, actually, I'm not a gamer, but my favorite game is Monument Valley. I don't know if you know it. It's by Us2 Games.
I don't know Monument Valley, but okay, at least
it's about illusion.
Oh, okay. All right. What about you, PJ? Besides Mario Brothers, what else?
Yeah, I do like seeing what games are available on Kickstarter. I like the fact that it allows individuals as well as teams create their passion projects, to see if they're available. So some of the games that I liked was Wasteland 2. That was a lot of fun. Currently I'm playing Pathfinder Kingmaker. I like that. I like the RPG, the strategy side, as well as if I'm going for a AAA game, I like the Total War series, such as Total War Warhammer.
So look, I'm going to ask you guys a trick question, okay? Because none of my other panelists have ever heard of the game. But I grew up playing this game called Puyan. Have you guys ever heard of it?
Puyan?
Yeah, Puyan. Okay, so I kind of, I'm still looking for one other person who has actually heard of it or ever has played the game. It was like a dead game, okay? It was a very easy game, but anyway. All right, okay, so now coming back more towards some of our questions. So I wanted to ask you, Margaret, about, how brands are able to use, games for business development, for better visibility, etc. So you've got some experience on that front.
Yeah, I feel as though brands have had a fairly long and storied and somewhat tenuous relationship with games. So there are several ways brands can interact with games. Either the brand itself is established through the game primarily, or I think when most people talk about this topic, it's when brands that have found success or inroads in other channels, whether it's book publishing, television shows or movies or musical groups, have some kind of gaming component. And brand work is really tough for the brand stakeholder. They often make a lot of mistakes. Sometimes they'll try to build it themselves, whether they bring a team in-house or they outsource it. And that can be challenging to really find a gameplay and a developer, and to have that kind of know-how to scale and create something. Sometimes brands then will go the complete opposite direction, and they will just license the heck out of their brands, and there's not a whole lot of potential quality control. So there's a lot that can go wrong with brands and games in terms of the partnership. But when it does work, it works really well, and it can be a real, at least initial boost with audience size. But you have to be really careful as a brand stakeholder. You really don't want to alienate your audience if you're making certain kinds of missteps. You really have to find, if you're going to reskin a game, a lot of brands love to reskin games. You've got to be really protective of your brand and the brand equity, and make sure that it's a good fit and it meets your audience expectations, because you can really alienate people in the process. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. A lot of game developers stay away from brands because of all the complexity, and the revenues are already sliced up a million different ways, so they don't want to do it further. And then finally, I will say, I think there's a huge opportunity with ed tech and educational games and brands that is very underexplored.
Okay,
I agree with Margaret completely that there's a massive opportunity for brands. And I would go one step further, not just with game developers, but with gamers in general. Like, the gamer audience is so incredibly undertapped today, cheap to reach. Like, the opportunity from a dollar per eyeball perspective is massive for brands, and it's not crowded at all yet, right? The other side of that coin is that it's the same advice I give to investors. It's tricky. It's tricky to navigate that space if you don't have the expertise, and the chance that a brand has that expertise in-house is pretty close to zero. And so that's the same advice I give investors, which is don't go alone. So if you go with someone, well, who do you trust? Well, the space has a lot of esports and gaming consultants who are really just journalists. The other piece of advice I usually give brands is just find a technology partner. Like, I invested in a company called Athlane. It's a bunch of Harvard data scientists who have created a data platform and marketplace so brands can go in, spend dollars, and see real ROI on those dollars, and it all be tracked very automatically, and all, they get confidence that what they're doing there is working or not working in a very kind of systematic way. So that's the other option. But I think it's massively untapped. Like, we haven't even seen, again, the inflection point in terms of brand dollars going into the space has not happened yet.
And if I just may quickly add, if we're seeing all these performances happening inside of games like Fortnite, and you'll see all these performers. So there's a whole other realm of entertainment and brands that's really exciting.
So look, I think, for our audience, I'm just going to, Marcus, did you want to add something?
Yes, very quickly. I agree with everything that Margaret and Paul are saying. I think another great opportunity for brands is, again, indie games, and like what John is doing, with that type of experience. You may have a local bike shop down the street that doesn't necessarily make sense for them to have a Fortnite or a Madden tournament. But if you could find an indie game that had a competitive gameplay experience around mountain bikes, now it makes sense for their brand. It's relevant and it's family friendly. The same thing if it's a real estate company, right? Maybe there is a real estate game potentially made by an indie developer where you wouldn't see that from a Nintendo or a Microsoft or an EA, where it just fits their brand. And now they can use video games as the evolution of social media as both a brand reach and brand loyalty strategy.
If I could jump in also, you're talking about brands, and Paul said how much there still is growth that's available. I think that goes back to also the acceptance of gaming. You would not look at brands, especially national and international brands, getting involved in video games 20 years ago, 25 years ago, because the acceptance of gaming just wasn't there. Now we're seeing gaming, not just by its revenue, but just by its sheer growth, is gaining acceptance. When I was working with a gaming company earlier, back in 2008, one of the things we want to do is we just wanted to give, it was a veteran-based World War II shooter, we wanted to give money to the World War II museum. Just say, we're giving money to you. We just want to make a donation. And unfortunately, the board of directors were in their 70s and 80s, and they said, oh, no, not games. And you don't see that anymore, which is nice. So with the rise of the video games, as well as you're getting the new generations coming into Gen X, the millennials starting to come into power, you're going to see the acceptance of more branding in games. But I do have to give the caution that advertising and branding in games makes great sense if it makes sense. You wouldn't want to put branding and advertising in games if it's intrusive, if it gets in the player's way, if it's not natural. Seeing billboards in baseball games makes sense. Or in soccer stadiums, but you don't want to see billboards when you're walking in medieval Europe. I mean, so it has to be real.
So look, I think I'm going to ask a very simple question. Oh, I see somebody. That's one of your toddlers who's come back in the back. Oh, okay. Hello there. They're still hiding. They're not showing us their complete face. Ah, there she is. Hello. Okay. All right. So I wanted to ask you guys, just for the audience, right? Because you're looking at it in different ways. What are the possible ways to make money if you're entering into this industry? The whole range.
I mean, like literally, like you can be doing anything and making money in the space today.
Yes. But tell us, just elaborate, okay? The reason why I want to talk about this. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
No, the beauty of being early in a space is like virtually there's opportunity everywhere, right? So you can be making games, you can be investing in companies, you could be doing consulting, you could be hosting tournaments, you could be, doing events, you could be, launching your own esports teams, you could be. There's a litany of ways you can make money. It really comes down to, I think, and I think the industry needs people from the outside to come in and do things, right? Like I think one of the things still missing is smart business people coming in, wanting to make money in the gaming space. And to me, it's figure out, where your expertise is and match it up with where there's opportunity in gaming. Like early in tech cycles, like where we are in gaming, you could make a ton of money just hosting gaming conferences. I mean, like literally in the early days of blockchain or whatever, the only people making money were the ones hosting conferences. And so, there's a ton of opportunity. It really comes down to where does your expertise match?
Okay. Does anybody else want a shot at the question?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I'll jump in. And I agree. The industry itself, even though it's big, it's pervasive on many different levels. It is still in its infancy. And with this sort of environment, you can make money and define what money is. But and how much. But you can make money from developing games, testing games, publishing games, to even modding, to doing voiceovers, to there's a whole niche cottage, niche, if you will, of journalism just for games. We talked about conferences, we talked about even reselling games. So there's the opportunities in the gaming industry are huge. Now you can make money even as a player. So when children are playing, my wife gets upset and I go, whoa, wait a minute, they're training. It's okay. No,
and I think that's fantastic, right? So one of the things that I would like to see, because obviously it's a big, huge, it's a big economic opportunity. So I would love for Pakistan to, bring in much more money for the country. And we've got the raw talent. We've got all of these gamers out there, but not enough perhaps. And there are indie game developers as well. But of course, there are challenges. We don't, there are a lot of gaming studios as well. But still, I mean, there is a long way ahead for the country to go. But I wanted to actually ask you guys for your messages, for all of you, actually, all 6 of you. What is maybe, the top message that you would like to leave for somebody who's trying to enter into the industry, whether it is as a person who's going to enter in as a professional or somebody who's actually trying to develop games? What would be one piece of advice that you would give to them. And for Margaret and Jana, for Margaret, I'm going to focus on it from the women perspective as well, because we see less, so in Pakistan, when I was looking for all of the gaming studio owners, most of them are men, right? We have a very good, we've got a very good number of women, but they're in lower ranks right now. So, what would be the advice for them, especially for women? And for Jana, I'm going to actually ask you to, put a twist on the question as well, really for young people. So, what some advice that you've got? Okay, who wants to go first? Okay, Margaret wants to go first.
Sure, I'll go first. So, in general, I always like to say that the tech industry is not a meritocracy, it's a mirrorocracy. And you see a lot of folks who control money and control access, working with and hiring the 5 years younger version of themselves. So just go into that with that reality. And I always tell entrepreneurs and anyone who wants to enter the games industry to really just know yourself, really know what excites you. Are you somebody who really wants to be part of a larger company, and that's sort of what your style is? Not to say it can't differ from year to year. If you're going to be a large part of a larger company, you're going to really want to specialize. Right now, there's a lot of emphasis on specialization over being a generalist. If you're an entrepreneur, especially an early stage entrepreneur, you're going to have to wear a lot more hats and really just know what you want as much as you can. Networking does matter. But at the end of the day, do not think for 1 second that there's a lot more work that needs to be done to level the playing field.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. Who wants to go next with your key message? Yes.
I think it's a fun career path that you can deliver a message through and make money, of course. But what I like most about the gaming industry is that it has so many jobs. So you can be a tester, a programmer, a designer, whatever fits your interest. So as Margaret said, know yourself, because you have a lot of options to choose from.
I think that's great advice. Thanks, Jana. Thank you. Yes. And I completely agree with you. That's the beauty of it. Anybody and everybody can jump in, right? So if you want to be you're creative at writing, you can write the storyboard for all of this, right? You could do the dubbing, you could act. I wanted to be an actress when I was growing up, and my mom wanted me to be a doctor, by the way. So anyway, yes, who wants to go next? Yes, PJ.
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on what Jan said. Yeah, if you're interested in the gaming world, just do it. Jump in, regardless of what your background is, regardless of what you've done in the past. Yeah, as Huxley said, it's a brave new world. Yeah, we need you right now. For gaming, even though like you said, $152 billion, growing 10%, which again is a low number. Yeah, I think that there's going to be plenty of room for everybody, and we need you. We need the different ideas. We need different people. We need different skill sets. So it's a very embrace, and we want you. The other thing is, at this moment, we're such a young industry. We don't have our famous, of course, Martin Scorsese. We don't have our famous directors. We don't have our Picassos, the great artist shit. We don't have our Shakespeares. Maybe it's you. Come join us in the gaming world and make your mark. Something that will last. We're looking for people and ideas that now will last a lot longer than normal bookshelf.
Okay, that's very good advice. Yes, I'm going to ask you just one final question after this. Okay, yes, Paul, go ahead.
If it means anything, Samar, I think maybe you should have pursued acting. I think you would have been good, based
Really?
just on the performance today. I have two pieces of advice, if that's okay. One, be ready to make sacrifices. Right, you're talking about an industry. For most people who are looking to get into it, this is something that they love. Right? Like gaming is something that they love. And when you're trying to combine your work with the thing you love, there's nothing better than that, right? If this is the ultimate sort of top
dream
of the mountain in terms of career. As a consequence, it's incredibly competitive, right? The amount of people who want to work in gaming, who want to combine the two things that they love, is like, there's a monster number. And so just be prepared. If you don't have experience, if you don't, like, be prepared to go in and hustle and make sacrifices and do a lot of work and a lot of shit work and a lot of the stuff that no one else wants to do maybe in the beginning. There's just, the reality is it's a massively competitive industry even today. And so to break in requires effort and requires consistency and requires persistence. I think the second thing is go in with as much education as you can. And I mean education around the space. And selfishly, I will shill my podcast, The Business of Esports, which is really all about sort of the combination and the intersection of business and esports and what's happening there. And I find way too many people pitch me their businesses without having listened to my podcast and understanding how I feel about things. But I have a book that I helped co-write coming out in August called The Book of Esports, which you can pre-order, which is a great sort of foundation. And book 2 coming out next year that's more on the future of gaming. But just educate yourself and be really persistent.
Yeah, I think that's advice for anybody and everybody, by the way. So your advice, Paul, applies to everybody who's trying to become an entrepreneur. Right now, we have a lot of entrepreneurs also because it's glamorized so much, right? And everybody wants to be Zuckerberg,
it's the nature of any hot tech cycle. I've seen this now like 10 times. Yeah. Blockchain, clean tech, ed tech, like you name it. I've seen every cycle come and go. Peak hype, everyone wants in, everyone's excited, everyone wants to do things. The amount who survive in the end is much smaller, but it's the ones who usually are the most persistent and want to be there, really want to be there.
Absolutely. Completely agreed, 100%. Marcus, what advice would you like to give?
I would echo what Paul and everyone else has said here. Namely, if you can't get a seat at the table, then build your own table. And that goes for creating your own gaming studio or trying to start your own esports team, or you asked the question earlier about, trying to get funding as an underserved demographic. Yes. If you, again, there's Kickstarter here, there's crowdfunding platforms, GoFundMe, that platform, that technology exists. If you're looking for experience in the space, I'd actually offer a counter example or a piece of advice for Paul, or that Paul said. I would actually work with indie studios. At least 75% of all PC games are created by independent game developers. The data isn't there to suggest that's the case across all platforms, but most likely it is. And what I understand is that most indie game studios are bootstrap startups. They have day jobs, either programming or some other profession, and they build their games on nights and weekends, which means they are in great need of additional support to grow their company. So as you're helping them potentially for free or some contractor capacity, you're building your resume, you're building your network, and leverage that and those contacts and that expertise for the next opportunity, all the while supporting small businesses around the world.
Thank you so much, everybody. This has been fantastic. I'm going to leave this particular session with a final question, which is more like a poll. So if you had to choose between a horror game, right, something kind of like The Quiet Place, if you've seen it. I don't know, have you guys seen The Quiet Place? Okay, well, anyway, so a horror game versus a game which is action adventure and based off of a history. Which one would you choose?
Action game, hands down.
Yeah, action adventure for me.
Yeah.
Okay, Marcus and Margaret?
Jana? Action game unless it's multiplayer like Resident Evil 4.
Okay.
Historical action, just kidding. I'll do both. I kind of like horror games.
Okay, What about you, Jana?
Well, action game. No, I don't like horror games.
I see enough horror in the startup world. I don't need that.
Neither do I,
to live
right?
it in my games.
Yes, neither do I. I think action is, I don't know. I mean, at least I think action is overrated. I mean, sorry, horror is overrated. But anyway, what do I know? Because apparently horror games, a lot more people like horror games. So, and look at Margaret also. She seems to like them more. But thank you very, very much for doing this with us. And, we're definitely going to be poking some of you, maybe a lot more than others, but hopefully we'll see you guys soon.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Samar.
you.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.